Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Trust. Edmund Weston had built his empire from nothing. Starting as a construction worker in Detroit, he'd clawed his way up through sheer determination and an unwavering code. Loyalty above all else. By 42, he owned Weston Construction, the largest infrastructure company in the Midwest, with contracts spanning 3 states. His weathered hands told the story of a man who'd never forgotten where he came from, even as his bank account grew into 8 figures. The cornerstone of Edmund's life was his family. He'd married Renee Burke 20 years ago, a radiant woman with auburn hair and emerald eyes who'd captured his heart at a construction site charity event. She'd been volunteering, serving coffee to workers, and Edmund had been struck not just by her beauty, but by her genuine warmth toward the blue-collar men others might have overlooked. Their son, Troy Weston, now 19, was everything Edmund had hoped for in an heir. Sharp-minded, respectful, and showing genuine interest in the family business, Troy had just completed his freshman year at Michigan State, studying civil engineering. During summers, he worked construction sites, earning the respect of Edmund's crew through sweat and competence rather than nepotism. Renee's sister, Cheryl Marshall, had always been the family's wild card. 3 years younger than Renee, she drifted through life on her looks and charm, never quite settling into anything substantial. Her engagement to Scott Dawson, a smooth-talking real estate developer, had been announced 6 months ago, much to Edmund's private skepticism. There was something about Scott's too-perfect smile and his habit of avoiding direct eye contact that set Edmund's instincts on edge. The Weston household was a testament to Edmund's success and values. Their sprawling home in Bloomfield Hills sat on 5 acres, with a workshop where Edmund still tinkered with engines and taught Troy the fundamentals of machinery. Family dinners were sacred, phones put away, conversation flowing easily between construction site stories and Troy's college experiences. But beneath the surface of this American dream, cracks were forming that Edmund couldn't yet see. Renee had been distant lately, claiming stress from planning Cheryl's engagement party. She'd been taking more spa days, more shopping trips, more time away from the family rhythm that had defined their marriage. When Edmund mentioned it, she'd smile and deflect, talking about how she deserved to enjoy the fruits of his labor. The engagement party was scheduled for a Saturday in late September, with Scott's family flying in from California. Edmund had insisted on hosting it at their home, despite Renee's strange reluctance. "It's family," he'd said firmly. "Family celebrates together." As the party approached, Edmund noticed subtle changes in the household dynamics. Renee and Cheryl would stop conversations when he entered rooms. Phone calls would end abruptly. Most unsettling, Troy seemed to be avoiding family gatherings, claiming extra study sessions or work shifts. When Edmund pressed him, Troy would look away, mumbling something about giving the women space to plan. The night before the party, Edmund found himself in his workshop, hands busy with an engine rebuild, but his mind elsewhere. His phone buzzed with a text from his foreman, Carlos Webb. "Boss, that new safety inspector's been asking questions about our permits. Seems off. Thought you should know." Edmund frowned. His company's paperwork was immaculate, but in his world, questions from strangers usually meant trouble. He made a mental note to investigate Monday morning, after the family celebration ended. He had no idea that by Monday morning, his entire world would be ash and rubble, and that Carlos's warning would prove to be the least of his concerns. Chapter 2. The Proposal Trap. The day of Cheryl's engagement party dawned crisp and clear, with autumn leaves painting the Weston property in brilliant golds and reds. Edmund had hired a catering company and set up the backyard with white tents and elegant lighting. Despite his reservations about Scott, he was determined to give Cheryl the celebration she deserved. By noon, guests began arriving. Scott's family from California seemed pleasant enough, though Edmund noticed they kept their distance from the construction workers and their families who made up Edmund's inner circle. The social divide was subtle but present, with Scott's people clustering around the bar, while Edmund's crew gravitated toward the food and lawn games. Edmund watched from the deck as Scott worked the crowd, his charm turned up to maximum. The man had perfected the art of making everyone feel like the most important person in the room, at least for the 30 seconds he spent with them. But Edmund's trained, I caught the calculation behind every smile, the way Scott's attention always drifted to whoever might be most useful to him. "You're brooding again," Renee said, appearing at his elbow with a champagne flute. She looked stunning in a navy blue dress that hugged her curves, her hair styled in an elegant updo. But there was something in her eyes Edmund couldn't quite read, a nervousness that seemed to go beyond normal party anxiety. "Just watching," Edmund replied, accepting the drink. "Making sure everyone's having a good time." "They are." Cheryl's practically glowing. Renee's voice carried a note Edmund had never heard before, almost like she was trying to convince herself of something. Troy appeared through the crowd, looking sharp in a charcoal suit, but carrying himself with unusual tension. "Dad, Carlos is here with the crew. They're asking about Monday's schedule." Edmund nodded, then paused. Something in Troy's tone was off. His son was usually direct, confident. Today he seemed almost guilty. "Tell them we'll discuss it Monday. Today's about family." As Troy melted back into the crowd, Edmund noticed him exchange a look with Renee. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but Edmund had spent decades reading people, and what he saw in that glance made his blood run cold. It was the look of conspirators, of people sharing a secret. The formal proposal was scheduled for 4 p.m., with Scott having planned an elaborate speech followed by a second proposal with a new ring. Apparently, the first one hadn't been special enough for such a momentous occasion. Edmund thought it was theatrical nonsense, but he kept his opinion to himself. At 3:45, as guests gathered in the backyard, Edmund's phone rang. The caller ID showed Troy's number, which was odd since his son was supposed to be helping coordinate the proposal. Edmund stepped into his study to answer. "Dad." Troy's voice was strained, barely above a whisper. "I'm at the hospital. I've been in an accident." Edmund's world tilted. "What kind of accident? Are you hurt?" "Car accident. I'm going into surgery. They said it's serious." Troy's voice cracked. "I need you here." Edmund's training kicked in. Crisis management, clear thinking, decisive action. "I'm on my way." "Which hospital?" "Beaumont." "Dad, I'm scared." The line went dead. Edmund stared at the phone, his mind racing. Troy had been here 20 minutes ago. How had he gotten to the hospital so quickly? And why hadn't anyone else noticed he was gone? Edmund burst through the study door, scanning the crowd for Renee. He found her by the gift table, laughing with Scott's mother. When she saw his face, her smile faltered. "Renee, we need to go. Now." Troy's been in an accident. The champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering on the patio stones. But instead of the shock and panic Edmund expected, what he saw in her eyes was something else entirely. Annoyance, frustration, and then, most chilling of all, a quick glance toward Scott. "Don't call me at a time like this," she snapped, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet patio. "Today is my sister's proposal celebration." Edmund stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. Around them, the party guest had gone silent, sensing the tension. Scott appeared beside them, his arms sliding around Renee's waist in a gesture that seemed far too familiar. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime moment," Cheryl laughed, though her eyes were cold. "Stop ruining it." Edmund's gaze moved slowly from his wife to Scott, taking in the man's protective stance, the way his hand rested on Renee's hip, the guilty flush creeping up Scott's neck. The pieces clicked into place with brutal clarity. "How long?" Edmund's voice was quiet, deadly. "Edmund, please," Renee started, but Scott stepped forward. "Look, this isn't how we wanted you to find out, but..." The rest of Scott's words were lost as Edmund's fist connected with his jaw. Scott dropped like a stone, blood streaming from his split lip. Cheryl screamed. Guests scattered, and somewhere in the chaos, Edmund heard his phone ringing again. With shaking hands, he answered. "Troy, Dad, where are you?" "The surgery. They need consent forms signed." "I'm scared." Edmund looked at his wife, at her lover bleeding on the patio stones, at the wreckage of his family celebration. "I'm coming, son. Daddy's coming." As he walked toward his truck, Carlos Webb stepped into his path. "Boss, you need to know. The kid. Troy's been covering for them. He's been their lookout, their alibi. I'm sorry, but you needed to know. Edmund stopped walking. The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place. Troy's strange behavior, his avoidance, his guilt. His own son had been part of this betrayal. Thank you, Carlos, Edmund said quietly. Take care of the guests. Tell them the party's over. As he drove toward the hospital, Edmund's mind was already working, calculating, planning. He'd built an empire by being smarter, tougher, and more ruthless than anyone who tried to cross him. Now, for the first time in 20 years, someone had betrayed him. Multiple someones. People he'd trusted with his heart, his home, his legacy. They had no idea what they'd awakened. Chapter 3. The Emergency Room Revelation. Beaumont Hospital's emergency room was a maze of harsh fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells. Edmund's boots echoed against the polished floors as he strode toward the reception desk, his mind still reeling from the afternoon's revelations. The nurse, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, looked up from her computer. I'm looking for Troy Weston, car accident victim, supposed to be in surgery. She typed rapidly, frowned, typed again. Sir, I'm not showing any patient by that name. Are you sure about the hospital? Edmund's blood went cold. Check again. Troy Weston, 19 years old. He called me from here. After several more minutes of searching, the nurse shook her head. I'm sorry, sir. No one by that name has been admitted today. Are you sure he said Beaumont? Edmund's phone buzzed. A text from Troy. Dad, where are you? Surgery starting soon. Room 314. He showed the message to the nurse. She looked confused. Sir, room 314 is a storage closet. We don't have patient rooms numbered in the 300s. The realization hit Edmund like a physical blow. He'd been played. Completely, thoroughly played. His own son had lured him away from the house with a fake emergency, giving Renee and Scott the perfect cover for their affair to come to light during the chaos of the party. Edmund's hand shook as he dialed Troy's number. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. The phone had been turned off. Sir, are you all right? The nurse asked, genuine concern in her voice. I'm fine. Edmund lied, his voice barely recognizable. Just a misunderstanding. The drive back to Bloomfield Hills felt like a journey through hell. Edmund's mind raced through the implications. This wasn't just an affair. It was a coordinated betrayal involving his wife, her lover, and his own son. The fake emergency had been elaborately planned, complete with props and timing designed to maximum emotional impact. As he pulled into his driveway, Edmund saw that most of the guests had left. A few stragglers remained, helping with cleanup, but the celebration was clearly over. Carlos Webb approached the truck as Edmund got out. Boss, after you left, things got interesting. Scott's been making calls, and I caught some of what he said. Something about Phase 2 and the timeline moving up. Thought you should know. Edmund nodded grimly. Carlos, I need you to do something for me. Quietly. I need surveillance on this house. Cameras, audio, the works. Can you handle that? Already on it, boss. Had a feeling something was off. The equipment will be installed tomorrow while you're at the office. Edmund clasped his foreman's shoulder. Thank you. And Carlos? Not a word to anyone. Not even the crew. You got it, boss. Just be careful. Whatever's going on here, it's bigger than just an affair. Inside the house, Edmund found the aftermath of the party. Renee was in the kitchen, mechanically loading dishes into the dishwasher. She looked up when he entered, her face pale but defiant. Is Troy okay? She asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. You tell me, Renee. You seem to know more about my son's whereabouts than I do. She turned back to the dishes, avoiding his eyes. I don't know what you mean. The hospital had no record of him. Room 314 is a storage closet. He played me, and you knew it. Renee's hands stilled on the plates. When she turned around, the mask had finally slipped. The woman he'd loved for 20 years was gone, replaced by someone cold and calculating. Edmund, you have to understand. I understand perfectly. My wife, my son, and my soon-to-be brother-in-law have been planning this for months. The only question is why. Before Renee could answer, the front door opened. Scott walked in, his jaw swollen and a butterfly bandage over his split lip. Behind him came Troy, looking sullen and avoiding eye contact. Dad, Troy started, but Edmund held up a hand. Don't. Just don't. Edmund studied his son's face, looking for any trace of the boy he'd raised, the young man he'd been so proud of. What he saw instead was a stranger, someone who'd learned to lie with practiced ease, who'd betrayed his own father without apparent remorse. "How long have you been part of this?" Edmund asked quietly. Troy's jaw tightened. "It's not what you think." "Then explain it to me." The silence stretched between them. Finally, Scott stepped forward, his voice slightly slurred from his swollen jaw. "Edmund, we need to talk. All of us. There are things you don't understand about your family, about your business, about a lot of things." Edmund's laugh was bitter. "Oh, I think I understand plenty. My wife's been sleeping with my future brother-in-law, and my son's been helping them cover it up. What else is there to understand?" "The house," Renee said suddenly. "The company. The accounts. Edmund, you're going to lose everything anyway. We were trying to save what we could." Edmund felt the world tilt again. "What are you talking about?" Scott pulled out his phone, scrolling through what looked like legal documents. "Those permits Carlos mentioned? They're fraudulent. The safety violations on your job sites? They're real. The state's been building a case against Weston Construction for months. By next week, you'll be facing federal charges." The room spun. Edmund gripped the counter for support. "That's impossible. I run a clean operation." "No, you don't," Troy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You just thought you did. Scott's been helping me understand how the business really works. The shortcuts, the bribes, the safety violations. It's all going to come out." Edmund stared at his son, seeing the truth in his eyes. Not just betrayal, but something worse. Troy actually believed what he was saying. He'd been convinced that his father was a criminal, that the empire Edmund had built was constructed on lies and corruption. "So, you decided to what?" "Steal everything before I got arrested." "We decided to protect what we could," Renee said, her voice strengthening. "Scott has connections. He can make this go away, but only if we cooperate." Edmund's mind raced. The pieces were falling into place, but not in the way his family thought. This wasn't just about an affair or even about framing him for crimes. This was about something much bigger, much more carefully planned. And what does Scott get out of this generous offer? Scott's smile was cold. A successful construction company, a beautiful wife, a stepson who respects him. Everything you're about to lose. Edmund nodded slowly, as if considering. "I see. And you really think the state has a case against me?" "We know they do," Troy said. "I've seen the evidence." Scott showed me. "Show me." For the next hour, Edmund listened as his family laid out their case against him. Falsified permits, ignored safety violations, bribed inspectors. The evidence was comprehensive, damning, and completely fabricated. But it was also extremely well done, professional enough to fool investigators and family members alike. As Scott spoke, Edmund noticed something the others had missed. Every piece of evidence could be traced back to Scott himself. The man had spent months creating an elaborate frame job, convincing Troy that his father was a criminal while simultaneously seducing his wife and positioning himself to take over everything Edmund had built. "This is very thorough," Edmund said finally. "Very impressive work." Scott preened. "I've been working on it for almost a year. The state investigators I've been feeding information to are completely convinced. And they're going to arrest me when? Monday morning. Unless you sign these papers tonight." Scott slid a stack of documents across the counter. "Transfer of business assets, property deeds, bank account authorizations. Sign these, and I can make the charges disappear." Edmund picked up the papers, scanning them carefully. It was all there, a complete transfer of his life's work to Scott Dawson, with Renee and Troy as beneficiaries. In exchange, Scott would use his connections to make the criminal charges vanish. "What happens to me?" "You disappear," Renee said, not meeting his eyes. "Scott has a place in Mexico. You can start over there. And if I refuse, then you go to prison for 20 years, Troy said, his voice cracking slightly. "Dad, please. This is the only way." Edmund set down the papers and looked at each of them in turn. His wife, his son, and the man who'd orchestrated it all. They were waiting for his answer, confident that they'd backed him into a corner with no escape. They had no idea that Edmund Weston had been fighting his way out of corners his entire life, and that he'd never lost a battle that truly mattered. "I need time to think," he said finally. "You have until midnight," Scott said. "After that, the offer expires and the charges get filed." Edmund nodded. "Then I guess I'd better get thinking." As he walked toward his study, Edmund caught his reflection in the hallway mirror. The man staring back looked older, tired, defeated. But behind his eyes, something was stirring. Something dark and patient and utterly ruthless. Scott Dawson thought he was the predator in this scenario. He was about to learn what it meant to be prey. Chapter 4. The Architect of Destruction. Edmund sat in his study, surrounded by 20 years of memories and achievements. Awards lined the walls, photos of construction sites, and ribbon cuttings documenting his rise from nothing to everything. On his desk lay Scott's papers, the instruments of his supposed surrender. But Edmund Weston had not built an empire by surrendering. He opened his laptop and began to type, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, he had Carlos Webb on a secure video call. "Carlos, I need you to listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this conversation." "You got it, boss." "Scott Dawson has been systematically framing me for crimes I didn't commit. He's got forged documents, fabricated evidence, the works. But more than that, he's convinced my family that I'm guilty." Carlos's face darkened. "That son of a bitch. What do you need?" "I need you to contact Detective Adrian Dunn at the State Police. You remember him from the charity poker games? Tell him I have information about a conspiracy to defraud the State Investigation Unit. But don't mention Scott's name yet. I want to control how this unfolds. Consider it done." "What else?" "The surveillance equipment you mentioned, I need it installed tonight. And I need you to gather the crew. The loyal ones. The ones who've been with me since the beginning. We're going to need them." After ending the call, Edmund opened his safe and retrieved a file he'd hoped never to use. Inside were background checks on everyone in his inner circle, family, employees, contractors. He'd learned long ago that in business, information was the ultimate weapon. Scott Dawson's file was thin but revealing. Born in San Francisco, moved to Detroit 6 months ago, officially a real estate developer, but with no significant projects to his name. What was interesting was what wasn't there: no long-term employment history, no substantial assets, no deep local connections. Scott was exactly what he appeared to be, a professional con man. But the real revelation came when Edmund cross-referenced Scott's arrival in Detroit with the timeline of his family's behavioral changes. Scott had been working on this scheme for almost a year, carefully cultivating relationships, gathering information, positioning himself for the kill. Edmund's phone buzzed. A text from Detective Dunn. "Got your message. Can you meet tonight? This sounds serious." Edmund smiled for the first time in hours. "Warehouse on Miller Road. Midnight." As he prepared to leave, Edmund made one more call. This one to his lawyer, Aaron Connor, a sharp-eyed man who'd handled the company's legal affairs for a decade. "Aaron, I need you to do something off the books. I'm going to send you some documents. I want you to examine them and tell me how they were fabricated. Don't worry about the legal implications. Just focus on the technical aspects." "Edmund, what's going on?" "Someone's trying to frame me. I need to know how they did it so I can prove it." Within an hour, Aaron called back. "Edmund, these documents are good. Really good. Whoever made them had access to state database systems, official letterhead, even internal case numbers. This is an amateur hour. Could Scott Dawson have done this alone? No way. He'd need help from someone inside the system. Someone with access to real case files and the ability to manipulate records." Edmund nodded. "Keep digging. I'll be in touch." At 11:30 p.m., Edmund arrived at the warehouse where he'd started his business 20 years ago. The building was dark, empty, but it held memories of every success and failure that had brought him to this moment. At exactly midnight, headlights swept across the parking lot. Detective Adrian Dunn stepped out of an unmarked police car, his face grave. "Edmund, Carlos, fill me in on some of this. What exactly are we dealing with?" Edmund handed him copies of Scott's fabricated evidence. "Someone's been feeding your department false information about my company. I think they're planning to use fake charges to force me out of business." Dunn examined the documents under a flashlight. "Jesus, These look official. If someone brought these to me, I'd have no reason to doubt them. That's the point. But look at this. Edmund pointed to a date stamp on one of the permits. This is supposed to be from last March, but the serial number format wasn't implemented until June. Whoever made this was working from outdated templates. Dunn's eyes sharpened. You think this Scott Dawson is behind it? I know he is, but he's not working alone. He has someone inside your department helping him. That's a serious accusation. I'm not making accusations. I'm offering to help you catch them. For the next hour, Edmund and Dunn worked through the evidence, identifying inconsistencies and impossible timelines. By 1 a.m., they had a clear picture of the conspiracy. I need you to do something for me, Edmund said. I need you to pretend to go along with this. Let Scott think his plan is working. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that if we're patient, we can catch him in the act. But I need time to set things up on my end. Dunn nodded. How long? Give me a week. Maybe 2. Can you stall any official investigation that long? For an old friend? I can manage it. As they parted ways, Edmund felt the familiar satisfaction of a plan coming together. Scott thought he was the puppet master, but he was about to learn that Edmund Weston played chess while others played checkers. Driving home, Edmund's phone rang. It was Troy. Dad, we need to talk. I've been thinking about what Scott said, and Not over the phone. Edmund cut him off. Meet me at the office tomorrow. Just you and me. Dad, I'm sorry. I really thought. Tomorrow, Troy. We'll talk tomorrow. As Edmund pulled into his driveway, he saw that the lights were still on in the house. Through the window, he could see Renee and Scott sitting close together on the couch, probably planning their next move. But thanks to Carlos's surveillance equipment, their planning session would be recorded. Edmund parked and sat for a moment, gathering his thoughts. In less than 24 hours, his world had been turned upside down. But he'd survived worse. He'd built something from nothing once before, and if necessary, he'd do it again. But first, he was going to destroy everyone who'd betrayed him. Methodically, completely, and without mercy. As he walked toward the house, Edmund Weston began to smile. The game was just beginning. Chapter 5. The Son's Confession. The next morning, Edmund arrived at his office before dawn. The Weston Construction headquarters occupied 3 floors of a downtown Detroit high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city Edmund had helped rebuild. He'd always found peace in the early morning quiet, the sense of potential that came with each new day. Today, that peace was shattered. Troy was waiting in the lobby, looking haggard and younger than his 19 years. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and his eyes carried the weight of someone who'd spent the night wrestling with his conscience. "Dad," he said, standing as Edmund approached. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." Edmund gestured toward the elevator. "Let's go upstairs." In his office, Edmund poured coffee from the machine his secretary kept stocked. He offered a cup to Troy, who shook his head. "I can't. I haven't been sleeping. Haven't been eating much either." Edmund settled behind his desk, studying his son's face. "So talk." Troy's words came out in a rush. "Dad, I need you to know that I never meant for it to go this far. When Scott first approached me, he said he was just concerned about Mom. He said she seemed unhappy, that maybe you and her needed to work things out." "When did he first approach you?" "Last Christmas. He said he was worried about the family, about how hard you were working. He seemed to really care about Mom's happiness." Edmund nodded, his face impassive. "Go on." He started asking questions about the business. Nothing that seemed suspicious at first, just general stuff about construction, about how the company operated. He said he might want to invest, maybe partner with you on some projects. "And you told him about company operations?" Troy shifted uncomfortably. "Not sensitive stuff, just general things. How he bid on jobs, how he managed projects. He was going to be family, Dad. I thought it was okay." Edmund's jaw tightened. "When did it change?" "A few months ago. He started showing me documents, evidence he said he'd found about safety violations, permit issues. He said he was trying to protect the family from what was coming." "And you believed him?" Troy's voice cracked. "He had official documents, Dad. State letterhead, case numbers, everything. He said there was going to be an investigation, that you could go to prison. He said the only way to save the family was to cooperate." Edmund leaned forward. "Cooperate how?" "He needed access to company files, financial records, employee information. He said he was building a defense, finding ways to minimize the damage. I gave him my access codes. The admission hung in the air between them. Edmund felt a cold rage building in his chest, but he kept his voice level. What else? He needed alibis. Times when Mom could meet with lawyers, when they could work on the defense without you knowing. He said it was important to keep you out of it until they had a strategy. So you provided cover for their affair. Troy's face crumpled. I didn't know it was an affair. I swear, Dad. I thought they were working together to save the family. When I found out about them, it was too late. Scott said if I backed out now, you'd definitely go to prison. Edmund stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. Troy, I need you to understand something. There is no state investigation. The documents Scott showed you were fabricated. The evidence was fake. All of it. But you saw what he wanted you to see. Scott Dawson is a con man. He's been planning this for months, maybe longer. He used your love for this family to turn you against me. Troy was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Dad, I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting everyone. I know you did. Edmund turned back to his son. But thinking isn't enough. You gave him everything he needed to destroy me. Company secrets, financial information, access to our systems. Do you understand what that means? Troy nodded miserably. I've ruined everything. Yes, you have. Edmund's voice was cold, final. But more than that, you chose to believe a stranger over your own father. You chose to trust someone you'd known for months over the man who raised you. Dad, please. I'm not finished. Edmund's tone cut through Troy's plea. You didn't just betray me, Troy. You betrayed everyone who depends on this company. Carlos, who's worked for me for 15 years. The crews who trust me to keep them employed. The families who depend on us for their livelihoods. You were willing to sacrifice all of them based on the word of con man. Troy was crying now, tears streaming down his face. I can fix this. I can help you stop him. Can you? Or will you just find another reason to doubt me when things get difficult? I won't. I promise. Edmund walked around the desk and stood in front of his son. Troy, I've spent my life building something worth passing down to you. I've worked 18-hour days, sacrificed time with family, made enemies and allies, also that someday you could inherit something meaningful. I know, Dad. I know. No, you don't. Because if you really understood what this company represents, what it means to the people who work here, you never would have betrayed it. You never would have betrayed me. Troy looked up at his father, desperation in his eyes. What can I do? How can I make this right? Edmund was quiet for a long moment. You can start by telling me everything. Every conversation with Scott, every piece of information you gave him, every lie you told on his behalf. Everything. For the next 2 hours, Troy talked. He detailed Scott's patient manipulation, the way the con man had gradually built trust before making larger and larger requests. He described the fake documents, the manufactured urgency, the careful way Scott had isolated him from his father while making him complicit in the scheme. When Troy finished, Edmund had a complete picture of Scott's operation. It was even more sophisticated than he'd realized, with multiple layers of deception and manipulation. But it was also built on a foundation of lies that could be systematically exposed. Dad, Troy said finally, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I've broken something between us that can't be fixed. But please, let me help you stop him. Edmund studied his son's face, seeing the genuine remorse and desperation there. Part of him wanted to forgive, to rebuild the relationship that had been so important to both of them. But a larger part of him, the part that had built an empire through ruthless pragmatism, saw only weakness and betrayal. You want to help? Edmund asked. Yes, anything. Then you're going to do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you, without question or hesitation. You're going to help me destroy Scott Dawson and everyone who helped him, including your mother. Troy flinched. Dad, Mom was manipulated too. She's as much a victim as... Your mother is a grown woman who made her choices. She chose to believe Scott over me, just like you did. She chose to plan my destruction, just like you did. And she chose to betray 20 years of marriage for a con man she'd known for less than a year. But, nope, but's Troy. You forfeited the right to defend her when you became part of this. You either help me completely, or you get out of my sight and never come back. Troy stared at his father, seeing a coldness there he'd never witnessed before. This wasn't the man who'd taught him to drive, who'd worked beside him on construction sites, who'd been proud of his college grades. This was someone harder, more dangerous. "I'll help," Troy whispered. "Good. Because what comes next is going to require both of us to do things we never thought we'd do. And when it's over, Scott Dawson is going to wish he'd never heard the name Weston." Edmund walked back to his desk and began making notes. "First, you're going to go home and act like nothing's changed. You're going to keep Scott thinking you're on his side. But everything he says, everything he does, you're going to report back to me. Okay. Second, you're going to help me set a trap. Scott thinks he's won, but he's about to learn that I don't lose. Ever." Troy nodded, wiping his eyes. "What do you need me to do?" Edmund pulled out his phone and showed Troy a text message. "Tonight, Scott's going to receive some very interesting information about offshore accounts and hidden assets. Information that will make him think he's found the mother lode. But it's fake. It's bait. And your job is to make sure he takes it." As Troy left the office, Edmund felt the familiar satisfaction of pieces falling into place. Scott had spent months manipulating his family, but Edmund was about to turn that manipulation back on itself. The game was entering its second phase, and Edmund Weston always played to win. Chapter 6, The Trap Springs. 3 days after Troy's confession, Edmund watched from his study as Scott paced in the living room below, his phone pressed to his ear. The surveillance equipment Carlos had installed was working perfectly, capturing every word of Scott's increasingly frantic conversations. "No, the timeline has to move up," Scott was saying to someone on the other end. "He's getting suspicious. We need to finalize everything tonight." Edmund smiled coldly. Scott had no idea how suspicious Edmund actually was, or how thoroughly his plan had been compromised. For the past 72 hours, Edmund had been feeding Scott carefully crafted misinformation through Troy, each piece designed to make the con man overconfident and reckless. The crown jewel had been the discovery of Edmund's supposed offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Troy had accidentally let slip that his father kept detailed financial records in a safety deposit box at First National Bank. The information was completely fabricated, but Scott had bought it completely. Edmund's phone buzzed. A text from Detective Dunn. "Your friend took the bait. He just contacted our insider asking for help accessing federal banking records. We've got him on wire fraud now." The insider Dunn referenced was Detective Marcella Stark, a longtime member of the Financial Crimes Unit who'd been feeding Scott information for months. What Scott didn't know was that Stark had been under internal investigation for corruption, and Dunn had flipped her weeks ago. Every piece of evidence Scott thought he was getting from inside the police department was actually being carefully orchestrated by Edmund and Dunn. Edmund walked downstairs, timing his entrance perfectly. Scott was just ending his call, his face flushed with excitement. "Edmund," Scott said, trying to look casual, "I was just checking with my contact at the state. The investigation is moving faster than expected. We really need those documents signed tonight." "I've been thinking about your offer," Edmund said carefully. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time for me to step aside." Scott's eyes lit up. "You're making the right choice. For everyone involved. But I have conditions." Scott's smile faltered slightly. "What kind of conditions?" "I want guarantees, legal protections, and I want to make sure my legitimate assets are protected before I sign anything over." "Of course. What did you have in mind?" Edmund pulled out a folder he'd prepared. "I have some investments and accounts that need to be transferred properly. Offshore holdings, that kind of thing. I need to make sure they're handled correctly before I disappear." Scott's predatory instincts took over. "Offshore accounts? How much are we talking about?" "Enough to make retirement comfortable, but I'll need help accessing them. The paperwork is complex, and I'll need someone I trust to handle the transfers." "I could help with that," Scott said eagerly. "I have experience with international banking." "I was hoping you'd say that." Edmund handed him the folder. "These are the account details. But Edmund, this has to stay between us. If Renee finds out about these accounts..." "She won't hear it from me," Scott assured him, already leafing through the fabricated documents. This is substantial, Edmund. 20 years of careful investment. I'd hate to see it all disappear into government seizures. Scott's mind was clearly racing, calculating percentages and possibilities. When do you need this handled? Tomorrow. The banks close early on Fridays, so if we're going to do this, it has to be then. Consider it done. Scott was practically salivating. And Edmund? You're making the smart choice. This way, everyone wins. As Scott hurried upstairs to share the news with Renee, Edmund allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Greed was such a predictable weakness, and Scott had just walked into a trap that would destroy him completely. Edmund's phone rang. Carlos Webb's name appeared on the screen. Boss, the team is in position. Dunn's people are ready to move. You sure about the timing? Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Scott will be at First National Bank trying to access accounts that don't exist. When he attempts to use forged federal banking credentials, they'll have him cold. And the wife? Edmund's expression hardened. Renee will be dealt with separately. I have something special planned for her. Boss, I gotta ask, what about Troy? He's been helping us, but Troy made his choice when he betrayed this family. There are consequences for that. Edmund ended the call and walked to his safe, retrieving a thick manila envelope. Inside were documents that would reshape his family's future. A revised will, updated business partnerships, and several other legal instruments that would ensure his legacy survived even if he didn't. Upstairs, he could hear Renee and Scott celebrating what they thought was their imminent victory. They had no idea that tomorrow would bring not wealth and freedom, but handcuffs and federal charges. Edmund poured himself a whiskey and sat in his favorite chair, looking out at the property he'd built with his own hands. By this time tomorrow, the people who'd betrayed him would understand what it meant to cross Edmund Weston. The phone rang again. This time it was Troy. Dad, Scott's really excited about something. He's been making calls all evening about bank transfers and account access. He thinks he's found some kind of jackpot. Good. That means he's walking into the trap exactly as planned. Dad, I need to ask you something. After this is over, after Scott's arrested, what happens to us? To our family? Edmund was quiet for a long moment. Troy, there is no family anymore. You made sure of that when you chose to trust a stranger over your father. But I'm helping now. I'm trying to make it right. You're helping because you got caught. You're helping because you finally realized that Scott was using you. But you didn't come to me out of loyalty or love, Troy. You came to me out of fear. That's not true. It is true. And it's why, after tomorrow, you're going to leave. You're going to start over somewhere else, build your own life, make your own way. The Weston name and the Weston legacy are no longer yours to inherit. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a minute. When Troy finally spoke, his voice was broken. Dad, please. I know I messed up, but I'm still your son. No, Edmund said quietly. My son would never have betrayed me. My son would have come to me with questions instead of conspiring behind my back. My son would have chosen family over the lies of a con man. I can change. I can prove myself to you. The time for proving yourself was months ago, when Scott first approached you. You failed that test, Troy. And in my world, there are no second chances for betrayal. Edmund ended the call and turned off his phone. Tomorrow would bring justice for Scott and Renee, but it would also mark the end of the family Edmund had spent 20 years building. As he sat in the darkness, Edmund Weston began planning for a future that would be built on the ashes of the past. He'd lost a wife and a son, but he'd gained something more valuable, the knowledge that he was strong enough to survive anything, even the betrayal of those he loved most. The final act was about to begin. Chapter 7. The Bank Job. Friday morning dawned gray and cold, with storm clouds gathering over Detroit. Edmund stood at his office window, watching the city wake up below him. Today would change everything, and he wanted to remember this moment, the calm before the storm he was about to unleash. At exactly 10 a.m., his phone rang. Detective Dunn's voice was tense with anticipation. Edmund, everything's in place. Our people are positioned at the bank, and we've got surveillance on Scott's location. Marcella Stark is ready to play her part. What about the federal banking credentials? Scott requested them from Stark an hour ago. She provided him with fake FBI credentials that will trigger federal charges the moment he uses them. We've got him on wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Edmund nodded. And Renee, that's your call. We don't have enough evidence to charge her with anything criminal, but leave Renee to me. I have my own plans for her. At 11:30, Edmund watched through his surveillance feed as Scott prepared to leave the house. The man was dressed in an expensive suit, carrying a briefcase that Edmund knew contained forged documents and fake credentials. Scott looked confident, even excited, as he kissed Renee goodbye. "Wish me luck, baby," Scott said. "By tonight, we'll be rich beyond our wildest dreams." "Be careful," Renee replied, but Edmund could see the greed in her eyes. She was just as guilty as Scott, just as eager to profit from Edmund's destruction. Edmund left his office at noon, driving slowly through the city toward First National Bank. He wanted to be there to watch Scott's world collapse in real time. The bank's main branch was a marble and glass monument to financial security, with high ceilings and an atmosphere of quiet prosperity. Edmund positioned himself at a coffee shop across the street, where he had a clear view of the entrance. At 1:45 p.m., Scott arrived in a rented BMW, looking every inch the successful businessman. He strode into the bank with the confidence of a man who believed he was about to score the biggest con of his career. Edmund's phone buzzed with updates from Detective Dunn. 1:47 p.m., subject has approached customer service desk. 1:52 p.m., subject is being directed to safety deposit box area. 1:58 p.m., subject is presenting credentials to bank security. 2:03 p.m., federal agents moving in. Through the bank's glass windows, Edmund watched as FBI agents in bulletproof vests surrounded Scott at the security desk. The con man's face went from confusion to panic to rage in the space of seconds. He tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. Edmund's phone rang. Detective Dunn's voice was triumphant. "We got him, Edmund. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted access to federal banking systems with false credentials. He's looking at 20 years minimum. What about his inside contact? Marcella Stark is already in custody. Turns out she was selling information to other criminals, too. She'll be lucky to see the outside of a prison cell before she's 60. Edmund watched as Scott was led away in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled, his arrogant confidence completely shattered. The con man who'd thought he could destroy Edmund Weston had just learned a hard lesson about underestimating his targets. But Scott's arrest was only the beginning. Edmund drove home through the storm that had been threatening all day. Rain lashed his windshield as he pulled into his driveway, and lightning illuminated the house, where his wife was probably celebrating her premature victory. Inside, he found Renee in the living room, pacing nervously and checking her phone every few seconds. "Edmund, thank God you're home. Scott went to handle some business this afternoon, and I haven't heard from him. I'm starting to worry." Edmund hung up his coat and walked to the bar, pouring himself a scotch. "I wouldn't worry about Scott anymore, Renee." "What do you mean?" "I mean Scott Dawson is currently in federal custody, charged with wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. He'll be spending the next 20 years in prison." Renee's face went white. "That's impossible. You're lying." Edmund pulled out his phone and showed her a news article that had already been posted online. Local real estate developer arrested in banking fraud scheme. Renee sank into a chair, her hands shaking. "How did you know?" "I knew because I set him up. Every piece of information he thought he was getting from inside sources, every document he thought proved my guilt, every offshore account he thought he discovered. It was all fake, all designed to lead him into a trap." "But Troy said—" "Troy told you what I wanted him to tell you. My son may have betrayed me initially, but he's been working for me for the past week. Every conversation you and Scott had was recorded. Every plan you made was reported back to me." Renee stared at him in shock. "You've been playing us. I've been destroying you. Systematically, completely, and without mercy." Edmund's voice was cold as winter steel. Scott thought he was the predator, but he was just another mark. And you, Renee, were just another accomplice in his scheme. "Edmund, please. I can explain." "Explain what?" "How you threw away 20 years of marriage for a con man. How you were willing to destroy everything I built because you thought you'd found something better." Renee's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand. Scott made me feel alive again. He made me feel wanted, desired. When was the last time you looked at me the way he did? When was the last time you deserved to be looked at that way? Edmund's words hit like physical blows. You want to know the truth, Renee? Scott didn't desire you. He was using you, just like he used Troy, just like he tried to use me. You were just another tool in his con game. That's not true. Edmund pulled out a tablet and played a recording from their surveillance system. Scott's voice filled the room, speaking to someone on the phone. The wife is completely under control. She actually thinks I love her. It's pathetic, really, but she's useful for getting information and keeping the husband distracted. Once I have control of the company, I'll dump her and disappear with the money. Renee listened to the recording with growing horror, tears streaming down her face. He said he loved me. He said what he needed to say to manipulate you, just like you said what you needed to say to betray me. Edmund finished his scotch and set the glass down with finality. Pack your things, Renee. You have until tomorrow morning to get out of my house. Where am I supposed to go? I don't have anywhere. That's not my problem anymore. You made your choice when you decided to destroy our marriage. Now you get to live with the consequences. What about the divorce? What about my share of? What share? Edmund's laugh was bitter. You conspired to defraud me, Renee. You participated in a criminal enterprise designed to steal everything I've worked for. Any competent lawyer will advise you to take whatever settlement I offer and be grateful you're not in prison alongside your boyfriend. Renee sobbed openly now, the full weight of her situation finally sinking in. Edmund, please. I made a mistake, but we can work through this. We can go to counseling, start over. There is no starting over. There is no working through this. You betrayed me. You betrayed our marriage. And you betrayed everything I thought we had together. Edmund's voice was final, implacable. You're dead to me, Renee. Just like Scott is dead to me. Just like Troy is dead to me. Troy? What about Troy? Troy made his choice when he decided to help Scott destroy me. He's no longer my son, and he's no longer welcome in this family. Edmund walked toward the stairs, then paused. One more thing, Renee. If you try to take anything that isn't yours, if you make any public statements about our marriage or my business, if you cause any problems whatsoever, I will make your life a living hell. Scott thought he was ruthless, but he was just an amateur compared to what I'm capable of when someone betrays me. As Edmund climbed the stairs to his bedroom, Renee's sobs echoed through the house. But he felt no sympathy, no regret, no second thoughts. She had chosen her path, and now she would walk it alone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and a new life built on the ashes of the old one. Edmund Weston had lost a family, but he'd proven something more important. He was a survivor, and he was not a man to be underestimated. The reckoning was almost complete. Chapter 8. The Final Judgment. 6 months later, Edmund stood in the courthouse parking lot, watching as Troy emerged from the building with his public defender. His son, former son, Edmund corrected himself, looked thinner, older, wearing an ill-fitting suit that spoke to his changed circumstances. Troy had been charged as an accessory to Scott's fraud scheme. While the prosecutors had shown some mercy due to his cooperation and his status as a victim of manipulation, he still faced federal charges that would likely result in prison time. Edmund had not testified on his behalf. As Troy walked past Edmund's truck, their eyes met for a moment. Troy's face was a map of regret and desperation, but Edmund felt nothing. The boy who'd sat in construction sites with him, who'd learned to drive in this very parking lot, who'd made him proud at high school graduation. That boy was gone, replaced by a stranger who'd chosen betrayal over loyalty. Troy stopped walking and approached the truck. "Dad, I'm not your father anymore, Troy. We established that months ago. Please, I know you're angry, but I'm facing 5 years in federal prison. 5 years of my life gone because I trusted the wrong person. You're facing 5 years because you betrayed your family. The person you trusted was irrelevant. You chose to trust him over me." Troy's voice cracked. "I was 19 years old. I made a mistake. You made a choice. And choices have consequences." Edmund started his truck, but Troy moved to block his path. "What happened to forgiveness? What happened to family loyalty? You always taught me that family comes first. I did teach you that, and you threw it back in my face the moment someone offered you what seemed like a better deal. I thought I was protecting everyone. Edmund's eyes were cold as winter ice. You thought you were protecting everyone except the one person who'd actually earned your loyalty. You were willing to believe I was a criminal, Troy. You were willing to see me destroyed based on fabricated evidence and the word of a con man you'd known for less than a year. I see that now. I understand what I did wrong. Do you? Because from where I sit, you understand that you got caught. You understand that your scheme failed, and now you're facing consequences. But I don't think you truly understand the depth of your betrayal. Troy was crying now, something Edmund would have once found heartbreaking. Now it just seemed pathetic. What can I do? What would it take for you to forgive me? Edmund considered the question seriously. Nothing. There is nothing you can do, Troy. You crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. You proved that your loyalty can be bought, that your word means nothing when it's tested, that you're willing to destroy your own family if someone convinces you it's the right thing to do. That's not who I am. It's exactly who you are. And it's who you've always been. I just didn't see it before. Edmund put the truck in drive. Goodbye, Troy. Don't contact me again. As he drove away, Edmund caught sight of Troy in his rearview mirror, standing alone in the parking lot, his shoulders shaking with sobs. For just a moment, Edmund felt a flicker of the old paternal instinct. Then he remembered the betrayal, the lies, the willingness to destroy everything Edmund had built, and the feeling died. 3 blocks away, Edmund pulled into the parking lot of a small diner where Carlos Webb was waiting. His foreman slid into the passenger seat, carrying a manila folder. It's done, boss. Troy's going to prison, Scott's already there, and Renee signed the final divorce papers this morning. What did she get? Exactly what you offered. $50,000 in cash, her personal belongings, and a car. Everything else stays with you. Edmund nodded. And she signed the non-disclosure agreement. Every page. She can't talk about the marriage, the business, or anything that happened during the divorce. If she does, you get the money back, and she faces legal consequences. Good. What about Troy's legal situation? Carlos consulted his notes. His lawyer's trying to work out a plea deal. Probably looking at 3 years if he cooperates fully with the federal investigation into Scott's other schemes. Other schemes? Turns out Scott was running similar cons in 4 other cities before he came to Detroit. The FBI thinks there might be a dozen victims across the country. Troy's testimony could help convict him on multiple counts. Edmund smiled grimly. At least Troy's betrayal will serve some useful purpose. Boss, can I ask you something? Shoot. Do you ever think about, I don't know, reconciling with the boy? I mean, he was manipulated. He was young, inexperienced. Carlos, let me ask you something. If someone came to you tomorrow with evidence that I was a criminal, would you believe them? Carlos didn't hesitate. Not for a second. Why not? Because I know you. I've worked with you for 15 years. I've seen how you treat people, how you run your business, how you handle problems. I need a hell of a lot more than some stranger's word to believe you were dirty. Exactly. Troy lived with me for 19 years. He saw how I built this company, how I treated my employees, how I handled success and failure. And despite all of that, he was willing to believe I was a criminal based on forged documents and the word of a con man. Carlos nodded slowly. That says something about his character. It says everything about his character. And that's why there's no going back. Edmund took the folder Carlos had brought and leafed through the contents. Financial statements, legal documents, business contracts, the paperwork of rebuilding a life after betrayal. What's next, boss? Next, we expand. I'm thinking about opening a branch in Florida, maybe one in Texas. Fresh markets, new opportunities. Sound good. What about here in Detroit? Detroit will always be home. But it's time to build something bigger, something that can't be destroyed by the betrayal of family members or the schemes of con men. As they sat in the diner parking lot, Edmund thought about the past 6 months. He'd lost a wife, a son, and the future he'd thought he was building. But he'd gained something too. Absolute clarity about who he could trust and who he couldn't. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Dad, please. Just give me one chance to make this right. I love you. Troy. Edmund deleted the message without responding, then blocked the number. Some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt. Carlos, there's something else I want you to know. What's that, boss? You And the men who stayed loyal during all this, you're my family now. The company isn't just a business anymore. It's a legacy. And that legacy will go to people who've earned it through loyalty and hard work, not blood relations who can't be trusted. Carlos extended his hand. I'm honored, boss. We all are. Scott didn't just seduce me. He targeted me specifically, researched our marriage, our family, our weaknesses. He knew exactly what to say, exactly how to make me feel special and wanted. I was vulnerable, and he exploited that vulnerability with surgical precision. I'm not making excuses. I chose to believe his lies. I chose to betray 20 years of marriage. I chose to help him destroy the man who'd given me everything. But I want you to understand that it wasn't just an affair. It was a carefully planned manipulation designed to tear our family apart. The worst part is what he did to Troy. Our son was just a kid, Edmund, 19 years old and desperate to be accepted as a man. Scott saw that desperation and used it against him. He convinced Troy that helping him was the only way to save our family. Troy genuinely believed he was protecting us. I know you'll never forgive either of us, and I don't expect you to, but Troy is still your son, and he's suffering in ways you can't imagine. Prison destroyed him, Edmund. He came out broken, homeless, unemployable. He's been living on the streets for months, too proud to ask for help and too ashamed to face what he's become. I tried to help him, but I had nothing to give. The money you gave me is long gone, spent on lawyers and basic survival. I've been working minimum wage jobs when I could find them, living in places you wouldn't house animals. This isn't a plea for sympathy. It's just the truth. Troy came to see me last week. He looked like a ghost, Edmund. Thin, dirty, defeated. He told me he'd rather die than continue living with the guilt of what he'd done to you. I'm afraid he means it. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I'm asking anyway. Please don't let our son destroy himself over mistakes he made as a teenager. He was manipulated just like I was. The difference is I was old enough to know better. He wasn't. I can't live with what I've done anymore. The guilt, the shame, the knowledge that I destroyed the best thing in my life for a lie. It's too much. But maybe my death can serve a purpose. Maybe it can help you understand that Troy needs his father, even if he doesn't deserve him. I loved you, Edmund. I know you won't believe that after everything that happened, but it's true. What I felt for Scott was infatuation, manipulation, delusion. What I felt for you was real love, the kind that lasts a lifetime. I just lost sight of it when I needed it most. Please find it in your heart to forgive our son. He's paid enough for his mistakes. Goodbye, Renee. Edmund set the letter down and stared out at the city skyline. Renee was dead, his wife of 20 years, the mother of his child, the woman who'd betrayed him so completely, was gone forever. And somewhere in the city below, his son was living on the streets, broken and alone. Carlos knocked on the office door and entered cautiously. Boss, everything okay? Edmund handed him the letter. Renee's dead. Suicide. Carlos read the letter, his expression growing more troubled with each paragraph. Jesus, boss. I'm sorry. She's asking me to forgive Troy. What are you going to do? Edmund was quiet for a long moment. I'm going to do what I've always done, Carlos. I'm going to survive. I'm going to build. I'm going to prosper. And I'm going to prove that betrayal has consequences that can't be erased by guilt or regret or even death. And Troy. Edmund's voice was cold as winter steel. Troy made his choice. Renee made hers. They both chose to trust a con man over their own family. They both chose to destroy everything I'd built for them. The fact that they regretted those choices doesn't change what they did. Carlos nodded slowly. So we continue as planned. We continue as planned. The empire keeps growing, the company keeps expanding, and the people who've earned my trust keep being rewarded for their loyalty. What about the letter? What about Troy being homeless? Edmund walked to his shredder and fed Renee's letter into it, watching as her final words were cut into ribbons. What about it? He's an adult who made adult choices. If he's suffering the consequences of those choices, that's justice, not tragedy. As the last pieces of the letter disappeared, Edmund felt a sense of finality. Renee was dead, Troy was lost, and the family he'd spent decades building was gone forever. But Edmund Weston remained, stronger, and more successful than ever. He'd learned the most important lesson of his life. Blood meant nothing compared to loyalty, and family was something you built rather than something you inherited. The empire he'd created would outlast him, carried forward by people who'd proven their worth through dedication and trust rather than genetics and promises. And when Edmund Weston finally left this world, his legacy would be secure in hands that had earned the right to hold it. That was a victory worth more than forgiveness, more than reconciliation, more than the love of people who'd proven they couldn't be trusted with it. Edmund Weston had won the only war that truly mattered, the war for his own soul, and he would never surrender it again. As they shook hands, Edmund felt something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. The future might be different from what he'd planned, but it would be built on a foundation of proven loyalty rather than assumed family bonds. The phone buzzed again. Another unknown number, another message from Troy. Edmund blocked it without reading and turned off his phone. The past was finished. It was time to build the future. Chapter 9. Empire Rebuilt. 2 years later, Edmund stood on the observation deck of the newly completed Weston Tower, a 40-story monument to his resilience and success. The building had risen from a downtown Detroit lot that had been empty for decades, its steel and glass reaching toward the sky like a middle finger to everyone who'd thought his downfall was permanent. The expansion into Florida and Texas had exceeded all expectations. Weston Construction now employed over 2,000 people across 3 states, with annual revenues approaching 9 figures. But more importantly, it was staffed entirely by people Edmund trusted, people who'd proven their loyalty through actions rather than words. Carlos Webb stood beside him, no longer just a foreman, but executive vice president of operations. The Houston project is ahead of schedule, and the Miami contract just came through. We're looking at another record quarter. Good. What about the Detroit City Council contracts? All approved. Mayor's singing your praises after the riverfront renovation. Says you've done more for downtown development than any other contractor in the past decade. Edmund nodded, satisfied. The riverfront project had been a gift to the city, a billion-dollar development that provided affordable housing alongside luxury condos, all designed to revitalize the neighborhoods where Edmund had grown up. It was his way of giving back to the community that had shaped him, while simultaneously proving that his empire was stronger than ever. Any word from the federal prosecutors about Scott's appeal? Denied. He's serving his full 25 years, no possibility of parole for at least 15. Turns out the judge didn't appreciate learning about his other victims during sentencing. Edmund smiled coldly. Scott Dawson had gone from thinking he was about to score millions to spending the next 2 decades in federal prison. The man who'd thought he could destroy Edmund Weston had instead become a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating your mark. What about Troy's situation? Carlos's expression grew uncomfortable. He was released 6 months ago, served 18 months, got out early for good behavior and cooperation with other federal cases. And he's been trying to contact you. Letters, phone calls, showing up at job sites. The security team's been turning him away, but he's persistent. Edmund's jaw tightened. I made my position clear. Has he violated the restraining order? No, he stayed the required distance. But boss, the kid looks rough. Real rough. Prison wasn't kind to him, and he can't find work anywhere. The felony conviction has closed a lot of doors. That's not my problem. I know, but Carlos. Edmund's voice carried a warning. We've been through this. Troy made his choice. He chose to betray his family for a con man's lies. The consequences of that choice are his to bear. Carlos nodded reluctantly. Understood, boss. Edmund's phone buzzed with a text from his personal assistant. Renee Marshall requesting meeting. Says it's urgent. Edmund showed Carlos the message. Renee's been trying to contact me too. 3rd time this month. What does she want? Probably money. The $50,000 I gave her wouldn't have lasted long, and she's not exactly equipped for the real world. You gonna see her? No point. We have nothing to discuss. But even as Edmund said it, he felt a flicker of curiosity. Renee had honored the non-disclosure agreement for 2 years, never speaking publicly about their marriage or the circumstances of their divorce. For her to be reaching out now suggested something had changed. His phone rang. Detective Adrian Dunn's name appeared on the screen. Adrian, what can I do for you? Edmund, I need to give you a heads up about something. Renee Marshall was found dead in her apartment this morning. Edmund felt the words hit him like a physical blow. What happened? Apparent suicide. Pills and alcohol. She'd been dead for at least 2 days before the landlord found her. Edmund sank into a chair, the news hitting him harder than he'd expected. Any note? That's why I'm calling. She left several letters. One was addressed to you. An hour later, Edmund sat in his office, staring at an envelope with his name written in Renee's familiar handwriting. Inside was a 3-page letter that he read twice before the full impact sank in. Edmund, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I know you probably won't care, and I understand why. What I did to you, to our marriage, to our family, there's no excuse for it. But I need you to know the truth before I go. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.